Welcome to the Weather Insights Tropical Briefing. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner, and we are recording this on the 10th of September, a little after 8 Central, and of course we're looking at Tropical Storm Francine. Not a lot of change in the strength overnight. You can see it on the infrared satellite here. Did throw some pretty heavy bands of rain across southern Texas, Brownsville, getting near nearly 3.5 inches, I think, last night, Jeff. And, it hasn't really started to move yet. But also, it's also fighting a lot of that dry air. That's that blue area you see kind of wrapping around. And if you see on that last loop, you see a little strong convection spot just north of the eye. That could be a sign that this thing is starting to get its act together. It is forecast by the National Hurricane Center to move on shore Wednesday, sometime Wednesday afternoon, as a Category 2 right now. So we'll see if that validates. But for right now, there it is on radar. You can see the eye there, just southeast of Brownsville. You can see those heavy rain bands still moving across South Texas and getting pretty close to the Texas coastline up there around the crossroads and north. And of course, it's going to continue that north track and is expected to turn northeast eventually. And then that track forecast hasn't shifted much. Some of the rainfall amounts, we'll look at that, has shifted, at least for southeast Texas. But there's the official track. We have a tropical storm warning. That's the blue area down there from Mexico all the way to north there, just north of Brownsville in Port Mansfield area. Then from Port Mansfield to High Island, we have a tropical storm watch. That's that yellow shaded area. And then another small area for tropical storm warning from High Island over to the Sabine River. And then from Sabine over to just west of New Orleans, we have a hurricane warning. And then from there, another tropical storm warning from that area over to New Orleans, and then around Lake Pontchartrain there, tropical storm watch. So the warned areas are still, there are some changes from tropical storm watch to tropical storm warning, but generally the same. Track generally the same. You see it 1 a.m. as a hurricane on Wednesday, and then by 1 p.m. Wednesday, just off the coast of Louisiana. Not much of that has changed, and we're just waiting for Francine to kind of get its act together, Jeff.
Yeah, we'll see here over the next few hours. I mean, the development of this deep convection in the last couple of hours right over the center could be the start of something. We'll see. We've seen this before, especially when these tropical systems are fighting off dry air. You'll get a pulse of deep convection, and then that dry air works in there and cuts it off. And so we'll see if this is finally that inner core trying to form and flush out that dry air or not. Kind of one thing to mention, the orange here is the wind field, and you can see the tropical storm force winds kind of scraping the northeast Mexican coast. I did look at the observations down at Port Isabel this morning. They're north of like 15 to 20. So I think if you get some tropical storm force winds down on the lower coast, it's probably going to be in a few gusts, and then the attention will shift over here towards the extreme upper Texas coast, High Island eastward, and then over to Louisiana as we get into tonight and tomorrow. So most of this tropical storm watch area, we're probably not going to see tropical storm force winds, which is exactly why it's a watch and not a warning. So watch means possible, warning means those types of winds are likely. Yeah. And I've had a lot of questions, why is this going to shift back to the west? Is this gonna be like Beryl and all this? And really, unlike Beryl, where we had a lot of uncertainty, we actually have quite a bit of confidence and certainty in the forecast track for Francine. And you can see there's this old frontal boundary that's kind of laying here still across the northern Gulf. I mean, the dew points outside this morning are in the low 60s and upper 50s in southeast Texas. So we're still on that dry side of that old front
almost
that
chilly,
came through. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a winter morning outside.
Right. Yeah.
That came through this weekend, and you can see the wind flow here, the steering flow from Texas along the Gulf Coast is really from west to east, and so Francine has to turn toward the northeast and maybe even the east northeast as it gets up here into this steering flow, and the real culprit is right here, this very kind of modest circulation here. This is a shortwave trough over the El Paso area, and this is going to push across Texas, and this is what's going to grab the hurricane, tropical storm hurricane, bring it northward, and then turn it northeastward and accelerate it off to the northeast as we get into tomorrow. And so there's very little chance for Francine to come back to the west or make landfall on the Texas coast. This is a classic fall, if you will, type weather pattern with a tropical system in the Gulf that's going to turn to the northeast, really because of this shortwave trough here coming through West Texas into Mexico. And then it's going to kind of push up through the mid-Mississippi Valley, like you showed there on the forecast track. No big changes to the tropical storm force winds. Again, that's 40-mile-an-hour winds. Probabilities here on the upper Texas coast, anywhere from 30 to 50%, Galveston, Bolivar, over towards Jefferson County. And the timing sped up a little bit. So, if we were to get something around Matagorda Bay, we're talking this evening. I don't think you're going to see it. I think the track is far enough offshore that you're not going to get tropical storm force winds in Matagorda Bay. Could you get a 40-mile-an-hour wind gust with a squall? Absolutely. But you get 40-mile-an-hour wind gust with a shower in the summertime, anytime. And then around midnight here, coming up towards the mid upper Texas coast or the Galveston Bay area. And then tomorrow morning, those tropical storm force winds spreading into the Louisiana coast. And so, like we said yesterday, today's the last day for preparations on the Louisiana coast. Whatever you're going to do, today's the day to do it. By tomorrow morning, this time tomorrow morning, 24 hours from now, you will have 40-mile-an-hour winds on the coast. And as we saw with that radar, you already have showers and squalls kind of coming in as a function of that old frontal boundary kind of backing up toward the coast. So conditions here in southern Louisiana are really going to be kind of going downhill over the next 24 hours or so. And then we take a look at the 50 knot or the 58-mile-an-hour wind. So this is that wind speed where you start to see some damaging wind potential, tree limbs, power lines, power infrastructure, some fences, stuff like that. And you can see the probability of those winds here on the upper coast are very low. We're talking 5 to 10%, maybe 20% down along Galveston and Bolivar. The metro area is really, it's less than 5%. We're talking zero here in the metro area. So the chances of any damaging winds in Houston, the metro area, and even down along the upper Texas coast are very low. But obviously those chances get much higher. And look at the inland extent here of the damaging wind speed. So Lafayette, Louisiana, New Iberia, down towards Morgan City, all the way over here towards Baton Rouge. You have probabilities here of these damaging winds pushing inland. And with the storm turning northeast and then accelerating, that forward speed picking up, it's going to bring those strong winds further inland across Louisiana. So even way up here in Baton Rouge, the metro Baton Rouge area, which is well inland from the landfall point, I suspect you're going to get some really good gusts out of this. And there's going to be a lot of power outages well inland across Louisiana, possibly even up into Mississippi, as we get into Wednesday night and even Thursday as this wraps up and moves northeast.
It's interesting too, Jeff. The 58-mile-an-hour threshold is also the same threshold that they use for determining severe thunderstorms. One of the thresholds. The difference is with a severe thunderstorm, those winds can last maybe a few seconds or a minute or so. But when you have 58-mile-an-hour sustained, like we saw with Beryl, that's where you get a lot of damage. So yeah, widespread damage, power outages for sure.
Yeah, and that's going to go on for at least a few hours.
Right.
Again, the storm's going to be accelerating, so that's going to sort of cut down a little bit on how long some of these strong winds last. But that strong wind's going to get really far inland. Likely equal to Beryl, if not further than that, since we're going to be accelerating the forward speed here. The other thing, the storm surge, we clearly have a significant storm surge event coming towards the south central Louisiana coast. Again, I keep harping on this Vermilion Bay area here. You have a concave bay where that south and southwesterly wind is going to pile that water into this concave shape. And so you're going to get some really high values here. And anywhere from Cameron, Louisiana, all the way over to Port Fourchon, we could get some big values. Interestingly enough, this is where Ida hit back in 2021, I think it was. And I did some surveying down there with Ida on the storm surge stuff, and there was a significant surge down through this area with Ida. So obviously, Louisiana coast extraordinarily surge prone. This surge is going to go inland for miles because it's just such a marshy, low elevation area here in south central Louisiana.
Very
And
flat.
you can see some of these values. This red here is up to 9 feet or greater than 9 feet, potentially above normally dry ground. And how far inland this extends, we're talking miles inland with the potential for storm surge here. So, heed all of those recommendations for evacuation from local officials in South Central Louisiana. And really, today's the last day to get out. And, like I said yesterday, I've been down here, Intercoastal City, Pecan Island. These areas are very low. It's a one-way, two-lane road in and out of these areas. And once the seawater comes up and cuts that off, that's it. You're not going to be able to get out. So today's the day to get out of these areas down here on the southern south central Louisiana coast. And you don't have to go far. We're not going to see storm surge flooding
Yeah.
up in Lafayette in these areas. So, it's perfectly fine to go up here toward the I-10 corridor just to get out of that seawater threat.
Yep.
And then, like you mentioned, we continue to cut back more and more on the rainfall. Some of this is a function of the storm accelerating, and so you can see these numbers here. Up to a half a foot of rain here across southeast Louisiana, south central Louisiana. So Baton Rouge potentially not only strong winds, but potentially a lot of rainfall. So the inland flood threat, the inland freshwater flood threat is certainly a potential here in south central and southeast Louisiana. Even over here in New Orleans, we're talking potentially a half a foot of rain. And this would be more of a function of these bands coming up from the south. Obviously, New Orleans is flood prone with the whole pumping system and all that. So you get some really heavy rains here and you can have some flooding. But really here along the Texas coast, yeah, we could get some banding, and really it's this afternoon, this evening, where some of these bands may push in here into overnight. I think by tomorrow, as the center passes off to our east, the northerly flow develops. We're probably not going to see a whole lot here, and you can see that gradient very sharp back here to the west over Texas. So
Yeah,
maybe an inch or two down along the coast. Still some stuff coming into South Texas this morning, and so that's kind of what we're dealing with the rainfall forecast.
Yeah, for Texas, draw a line around that I-69 corridor south and north of that. Boy, when this was all starting a few days ago, we were seeing rain amounts in southeast Texas 5 or 6 inches, and that has certainly dropped most of Houston now in the quarter to 0.3. Of course, it's just modeling. So, like you said, with tropical systems, those bands can fool you sometimes, and but I agree with you that the better chances for this evening, while the eye and the energy is south of Houston, once it gets over toward the east, those rain chances drop significantly.
One thing I did want to mention is tomorrow afternoon is our high tide here on the upper coast, and as Francine passes to our east, we're going to get a pretty good north wind down Galveston Bay, and so we're going to have to watch for some sea level rise and some coastal flooding on the backside of Galveston Island. So back around the Strand, the port area, Seawolf Park area, with that north wind kind of driving the water in the bay. The bay is going to be elevated from the water pushing in there today, and so that's going to try to drive that water down. And we've seen this before with hurricanes making landfall over here in Louisiana. We get some backside flooding on both Bolivar and Galveston Island. So we'll have to watch that tomorrow. You can see the Hurricane Center is kind of pulled back on the tide inundation here on the upper Texas coast. So we're looking really around a foot, maybe 2 feet. I'm not anticipating a lot of issues with those tide levels. The really big issue clearly is going to be over here in south central Louisiana and this Vermilion Bay area, and this is life threatening, folks. We're talking in that red area, 9 feet above the ground. That's 3 feet over my head, standing on the ground. So if you're on the ground over here and not elevated, you gotta get out of these areas.
Yeah, and like you said, small roads and unfortunately, not heavily populated, but also not a lot of access out of there. So today is the day, like you said, to evacuate and get out of that area, and you don't have to go far. You know, anywhere along I-10, I think you're safe from storm surge.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. And we mentioned this yesterday here, this
Yeah.
north side of Lake Pontchartrain, with that southeast wind coming across the lake, that's going to push that lake water up here into the Mandeville area and areas up here on the northwest side of the lake. And so this is very shallow, very marshy, but there's population up here, and so be aware that that lake water is going to encroach and likely overtake some of these areas here on the northwest side of Lake Pontchartrain. It's very surge prone over there. You know, just to mention New Orleans, everything you see in this white kind of hashed area, this is the federal hurricane protection system. We are not going to have any issues in New Orleans with respect to storm surge flooding from this. We could have some rainfall issues there, but all of the storm surge, all of the blue and yellow you see here is outside of the levee protection system. And so inside the protection, inside the levees, we're not going to have any issues with this level of storm surge. Down here in Plaquemines Parish, the levees get more interesting. So with that southwest and south wind, we could see some water up against some of these levees down here. It's a very interesting concept of levees down here in Plaquemines Parish. They kind of have a double levee system down there. It's very interesting. But even here, I think for the most part, we'll be fine. It's really over here in Vermilion Bay where we're really going to have to watch for the big water.
Yeah, water gets trapped in those small bays and tributaries. So yeah, it builds up quick, and 9 feet I think is above everybody's head. So yeah, get out. That's the bottom line. Well, we'll have another Weather Insights Tropics briefing this afternoon after the National Hurricane Center comes out with their update. So be sure to tune for that, and stay in touch by subscribing and to our YouTube channel, and feel free to share it with friends and family as well. And we'll see you again this afternoon. Jeff, thank you very much.